I work at a hospital where many strange and eerie stories happen. One of the most interesting things is the appearance of a little girl in a polka dot dress who often visits the hospital. She visits patients before they pass away. Some patients adore her, praising her cuteness, while others find her annoying and ask us to escort her out of the room. Either way, those who mention her will end up with their bed sheets knotted afterward, making the atmosphere in the hospital even more unsettling. Every time I start my shift, I always feel a sense of anxiety. The hospital is usually quiet at night, with only the sounds of medical equipment and the footsteps of staff echoing through the halls. I still vividly remember working in a room far from the nurses' station, which we call the Green Mile, because of its long and deserted corridor. The core lights would sometimes turn off randomly, or the TVs in patient rooms would turn on when no one was there. Every time I went back to turn them off, I always felt like there was some presence watching me. One of the most terrifying experiences happened one night, just after I graduated and completed my hospital orientation. Around 3 a.m., it was just me and another nurse at the nurses' station. It was a summer night before the COVID-19 pandemic, so there were fewer patients and staff. The nurses and charge nurse were downstairs smoking. While we were finishing our charting, both of us suddenly heard a chilling scream for help coming from the end of the hallway. We looked at each other and immediately ran toward the source of the scream. The scream was unmistakably from a woman, and we both agreed on that later. What was strange, though, was that everyone on that hallway at the time was male and sound asleep. We swept the entire floor to make sure no one else was there, but we found nothing. Our minds were racing with questions. Did something happen? Where did that scream come from? The tension and anxiety crept into every step we took, as the eerie atmosphere of the hospital seemed to close in on us. After that incident, I started paying more attention to the strange things happening in the hospital. One night, while working the night shift, I noticed that several patients frequently complained about seeing a little girl in pajamas wandering the hallway. They described her as wearing a polka dot dress, and they mentioned that she seemed to appear right before they experienced serious health issues. These stories made me feel uneasy, but I couldn't help feeling a strong curiosity about the little girl as well. Another experience, though less eerie but still quite intriguing, happened when I was with the same nurse in an empty room. We don't recall the exact reason for being there, but we were likely preparing for an admission. While chatting, she leaned against the bed. Our hospital is very rural, with old beds, and only the ICU has beds that can self-adjust. Just as she sat halfway down on the bed, it suddenly rose about 5 or 6 inches, as if someone had pressed the button to lift it. We looked at each other with scared expressions, wondering if the spirits didn't like us being alone. One other night, I had to work the night shift alone again. Around 2 a.m., as I was trying to finish my tasks, I felt a cold breeze pass through the hallway. It was a strange feeling because no windows were open and everything was silent. I got up to check the patient rooms, but all the patients were sound asleep. When I returned to the nurses' station, I heard a soft whisper, as if someone was having a quiet conversation. I thought it might be other nurses talking, but when I stepped in, no one was there. Throughout my time working, I started noticing strange signs. I saw lights flickering randomly, and sometimes I felt like someone was standing behind me while I worked. These experiences made me increasingly unsettled, and I began to wonder if I was being influenced by the stories I had heard from the patients. After a few months working at the hospital, I finally decided to share my strange experiences with my colleagues. When I recounted the eerie things that had happened, they just laughed and said it was normal for our work environment. But I felt there was something different about it. These experiences weren't just spooky stories. they carried a deeper meaning that I couldn't quite explain. The hospital is not just a place for healing, but also a repository of stories and mysteries that cannot be easily explained. Each patient and nurse carries a piece of history, a fragment of memory, sometimes lingering in the old walls of the hospital. I've come to learn that the strangeness in life is just a natural part of the work I've chosen, and these stories will forever remain an integral part of my journey. Throughout my time working at the hospital, I've learned to accept the strange and unexplainable. While these things may never have answers, they have taught me to be sensitive and respectful of what surrounds me. Even though there's a bit of fear, I still find a sense of wonder in the work I've chosen, and I know that these experiences will always be a part of who I am. I used to work at an old forensic hospital where the atmosphere is always heavy and filled with eerie stories. Day by day, I witness strange experiences that aren't easily explained. Even though I consider myself a skeptic, I don't believe in the supernatural, and I always seek logical explanations for every phenomenon that happens around me. One evening, we escorted the patients to the dining hall as usual. Afterward, I, along with two female colleagues, decided to stay at the nurse's station to check some equipment and documents. In my mind, all the patients had already been taken out of the ward, so we unlocked and opened the door to the nurse's station. The atmosphere was quiet, with only the soft sound of our conversation filling the room. While we were chatting, one of the heavy steel patient room doors suddenly swung open and then slammed shut. These doors are like those in a prison, and I felt a chill run down my spine. My colleagues immediately stopped talking, their eyes wide as they stared at the door. Our supervisor quickly grabbed the phone and called the dining hall, yelling at them to count the patients, fearing that one might have been left behind. The technical supervisor rushed to the room to check if any patients were still inside. At that moment, I was certain I had locked that door securely. I could see the shadow of a patient through the window for just a brief second, but it was enough to leave me unsettled. The supervisor reached the door, pushed it open, and stepped inside. After a moment, she returned, saying the room was completely empty. I was in shock. Everyone had to have seen it just like I did. The room was truly empty, and the head count in the dining hall was still accurate. All the patients had been accounted for, and no one was left behind. At that moment, my skepticism began to waver. I had worked here for years and had never seen a door move due to a draft or any other natural force. These doors are heavy, and the windows in the unit can't be opened, so there was no way it could have been caused by the wind or anything else. After that incident, I started hearing stories from my colleagues who worked the night shifts. Many of them swore that the building was haunted. Some said they had seen strange figures in the hallways, while others felt a presence they couldn't see. This made me anxious. Over the years working at the hospital, I had witnessed many strange things, but I had always tried to find logical explanations for them. One night, while working alone during the night shift, I heard strange sounds coming from the empty patient rooms. They were faint noises like whispers and giggles, but when I checked, everyone was sound asleep. A sense of fear and suspense welled up inside me, and I started to wonder if the ghost stories I had heard might actually be true. Once, during a shift, I had to go down to the hospital basement to check on a piece of equipment. It was a dark and damp place, with the sound of dripping water and echoes filling the quiet space. As I stepped inside, I felt like something was watching me. Even though I tried to push away negative thoughts, that mysterious presence left me feeling uneasy. These experiences not only filled me with fear, but also made me question what was truly happening in the hospital. I decided to talk with other colleagues about the stories they had encountered. A few of them shared that they, too, had seen shadowy figures gliding through the night, or felt an unusual coldness in places where there was no apparent reason for it. One evening, while sitting in my office, a sudden cold breeze swept through, making me shiver. I looked around and noticed all the doors were tightly closed. It was strange, and I couldn't explain the chill. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting back to the ghost stories I had heard. In the end, I decided not to let fear dictate my life. I chose to approach these strange experiences with curiosity rather than anxiety. While the mysterious and eerie may occur, I know that what matters most is the safety and respect I provide to the patients I care for. The hospital is not just a place for healing, but also a repository of stories and mysteries that cannot always be explained. Each patient and each nurse carries a part of history, a fragment of memory that sometimes lingers in the old walls of the hospital. Despite the occasional fear, I still find a sense of wonder in the work I've chosen, and I know these experiences will always be a part of me. The eerie stories and strange experiences have taught me valuable lessons about sensitivity and respect for the world around us. I've learned that skepticism isn't always a bad thing, but sometimes we need to be open to what the eyes can't see and the ears can't hear. In the end, I've come to realize that every experience, whether good or bad, holds its own value in the journey of life. I work at an old hospital filled with strange and eerie stories. Every shift brings unforgettable experiences. One night, after taking a patient through an extubation process, we transferred them to the morgue around 2 or 3 a.m. The security guard and I had a conversation with the morgue manager about the haunted tales surrounding the surgical rooms. We dropped off the patient at the morgue, which, ironically, is right next to the cafeteria. This made me think of all the Soylent Green stories people joke about. Afterward, we made an unplanned stop at the PAC. Even though we were supposed to return to the ICU, the PACU is on the opposite side of the hospital from the morgue, with no surveillance cameras, and no one knew we would be down there. As we entered the PACU, I immediately felt a strange atmosphere enveloping the place. Suddenly, the desk phone rang. I glanced at Chris, the security officer, thinking he was playing a joke. But when I saw his pale face, I realized something was wrong. Chris looked at me with fear in his eyes, as if to remind me that no one knew we were there. The phone kept ringing, adding to the growing tension. I moved closer to the phone to check the extension number, but there was none. The ringing continued, and just as I reached for the phone, it abruptly stopped. We got out of there quickly, but the lingering sense of unease continued to haunt me. A few days later, I was back on the night shift in the ICU. The unit has large floor-to-ceiling doors, creating a spacious yet eerie atmosphere at night. I had a patient in room 2 and was sitting across from room 4, which was empty. Directly behind me was the old recovery space, where we used to take patients when necessary. I always kept the curtains open because I didn't like the feeling of being hidden behind them. As I was working, I suddenly looked up and saw the reflection in the glass a woman dressed in an old-fashioned nurse's habit, complete with a nun's cap, slowly walking from left to right behind me. I felt frozen in place. I wanted to wave or acknowledge the figure, but she simply passed by without a word. It took me a moment to gather the courage to turn around, and when I did, there was no one there. A wave of fear spread through me. Why did I see that? It could have been just a hallucination caused by stress or fatigue, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual was happening. In that recovery space, I often hear strange sounds, rhythmic knocking, 3 times, then twice, then 3 more. It stops, but it doesn't sound like loose pipes or random clattering. I get the sense that someone or something is responding to that rhythm. Sometimes I even knock back in response, even though I know it's probably silly. As time passed, each shift brought more strange experiences. One night, while checking on patient rooms, I felt a cold breeze sweep through, even though all the doors were tightly shut. I looked around and had the eerie feeling that someone was standing near me. I tried to push away the negative thoughts, but I couldn't shake the sense of unease. Once, while I was sitting in the office, a colleague told me about an old patient she had cared for. The patient always spoke about a woman in white whom he saw in the recovery room. He insisted that she was taking care of him and would appear exactly when he needed help. This story gave me chills, but it also sparked a strong sense of curiosity in me. I decided to delve deeper into the ghost stories surrounding the hospital. Some of my colleagues had experienced similar situations and had heard crying or whispers in the empty hallways. These stories not only filled me with fear, but also opened up a mysterious world I had never considered before. One night, while working alone on the night shift, I heard footsteps echoing in the hallway. Even though I knew no one was there, a strange feeling crept over me. I stood up to check, but everything was silent. The sense that someone was watching me made it impossible to focus on my work. Over time, I've learned to accept the strange and unexplainable things in the hospital environment. I understand that these occurrences may never have answers, but they have taught me about sensitivity and respect for the world around me. I've come to realize that the hospital is not just a place for healing, but also a space filled with mysteries and stories that can't always be explained. In the end, I chose not to let fear control my life. These experiences aren't just eerie stories. They hold a deeper meaning that I can't fully explain. I've realized that every patient and nurse carries a part of history and memory, sometimes lingering within the old walls of the hospital. The hospital is a special place where life and death face each other, and where stories are written every day. I've learned to respect both my own experiences and those of the people around me. Despite the fear, I can still see the wonder in the work I've chosen, and I know that these experiences will always be a part of who I am. I work at a psychiatric hospital for the elderly in Warsaw, where care and support for the elderly are top priorities. I love my job. The staff here is wonderful, and we often receive gratitude from the older patients. However, there's one thing I can't ignore: the strange stories that the HCAs and night nurses often share. They believe the place is haunted. This hospital used to be a maternity facility, and many people have shared strange experiences related to infants. Staff often report hearing the laughter of children echoing down the hallways. And occasionally, they see the apparitions of children in different areas of the hospital at night. Interestingly, most of these experiences involve children or pregnant women, rather than the psychiatric patients we currently care for. One day, I was working in one of the medical areas near the doctor's office. When I was alone, a sense of peace filled the room. Suddenly, I heard a knock on the door. I got up, went outside, but no one was there. After sitting down again, I heard the knock again, this time louder. I decided to check once more, but again, no one was there. This was my only encounter with what people call a ghost, and to be honest, it left me feeling uneasy, as if I was being disturbed by something unknown. I know this could just be a coincidence caused by exhaustion and lack of sleep. I don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural. Still, this experience made me think. The knocking could have easily been sounds from another part of the hospital, echoing through the structure to my area. But I find the ghost stories here fascinating. especially since they tend to align more with the maternity aspect of the hospital's past rather than its psychiatric side. Most of the night shift staff have their own stories about strange experiences they've encountered. A colleague of mine once told me that she saw a white figure glide down the hallway at night. She heard a child crying, and when she ran to check, the room was empty. It's a story many of us have heard multiple times, but every time I hear it, it still sends chills down my spine. I've also witnessed other strange occurrences during night shifts. Once, while I was sitting and taking notes, the lights in the room suddenly went out. I thought there might be an issue with the electrical system, but when I checked, everything was working fine. A few minutes later, the lights flickered back on. I couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual was happening. Another night, while I was in a quiet area of the hospital, I heard footsteps. I turned around, but no one was there. Feeling uneasy, I decided to head toward the patient room. When I entered, all the patients were sound asleep, with no sign of anyone else being there besides us. Despite the fear, I continued with my work, trying not to let the ghost stories affect my mindset. Every time I heard a strange noise, I told myself it was probably just the sound of equipment or my imagination. But the truth is, these stories are always present, and a part of me can't help but feel curious about the strange things this hospital holds. I decided to join a staff gathering where everyone shared their strange experiences. During the meeting, many people told different stories. One nurse shared that she saw a woman in white walking down the hallway at night, seemingly searching for someone and completely unaware of others around her. Their stories were both fascinating and a bit eerie. I can't deny that there's a strange atmosphere in the hospital. And while I don't believe in ghosts, there's something within me that feels the need to respect my colleagues' experiences. Each shift brings a different experience, and sometimes I wonder if these stories are truly connected to the hospital's past. Perhaps unsettled spirits still wander here, or maybe it's all just a product of our imagination. Regardless of everything, my job is to care for patients and create a safe environment for them. I understand that some things can't be explained, but I also know that care and compassion for the patients are what matter most. I've learned to approach my work with sensitivity, and these strange stories only enrich my experience at the hospital. During my time working here, I've come to realize that strangeness isn't just part of the job, it's part of life. Each of us has our own stories, and those stories will always linger in this space. As night falls and darkness envelops the hospital, I understand that wonders and mysteries might be hiding in the shadows, just beyond what we can see. In the end, I decided not to let fear control my life. These experiences, though eerie, have helped me gain a deeper understanding of sensitivity and respect for the world around me. The hospital isn't just a place for healing, it's also a place filled with stories and mysteries that can't be explained. And these stories will always be a part of me, unforgettable memories in my journey of caring for patients. As a healthcare worker, I've grown accustomed to working night shifts at the hospital, but it's not always easy. Especially on winter nights, when the cold air and darkness make everything feel more mysterious. I remember one night when I decided to sleep at the hospital instead of driving 45 minutes home. I usually chose unused exam rooms near the cath lab and cardiac recovery unit to rest, as very few people pass by, with only the occasional security guard walking through. Clinic Room 3 was my favorite spot. It had a more comfortable bed compared to the others, and I always felt safe sleeping there. However, that night, things were different. I fell asleep around 11:36 p.m., but a strange feeling woke me up. I usually don't sleep deeply during shifts, but this time I sensed something was off. I was terrified, but couldn't bring myself to stand up. The noises didn't stop, and I felt as though someone was watching me from the darkness. That feeling made it impossible for me to fall back asleep, even though I knew I needed to rest for my next shift. The next morning, as I stepped out of the clinic room, a colleague asked if I had slept well. I told her about the strange sounds I had heard during the night. She looked at me seriously and said, "Clinic room 3 is sometimes used by the cath lab to store the bodies of the deceased, if the family wants some privacy before taking them to the morgue." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I had never imagined that I had slept in a room that could have been used to store bodies. The fear hit me hard, and I knew from that moment on, I would never dare to sleep in that room again. Even so, I still had to face other shifts. In the nights that followed, I tried to rest in different rooms, but the fear continued to haunt me. Every time I heard a strange noise, I was reminded of what happened in Clinic Room 3. Those sounds weren't just noises anymore. They became haunting images in my mind, leaving me feeling uneasy. One night, while working alone on the night shift, I decided not to let fear control me. I wanted to prove that the things I had heard were just products of my imagination. I sat down, focused on my work, and tried to forget about the sounds that had once made me anxious. But after a while, I heard the noise again this time. It was clearer and closer. I couldn't resist getting up to check what was happening. I walked into the hallway, where the warm lights cast long shadows. No one was there. All the patient rooms were silent, yet it felt like something was waiting for me up ahead. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, but it clung to me like a shadow. I eventually decided to return to the nurse's station, where the security guard was sitting. I asked him about the strange stories around the hospital, and he shared his own experiences. He mentioned hearing the laughter of children in the hallways at night, even though all the patients were sound asleep. These stories made me feel both anxious and intrigued at the same time. I began to realize that the hospital isn't just a place for healing, but also a space filled with stories and memories. Perhaps the sounds I heard weren't just products of my imagination. They could be echoes of the past, from people who once lived and worked here. I decided that I wouldn't let my fears prevent me from doing my job. Each night, I continue my work, and sometimes I still hear strange sounds from the surrounding rooms. The stories I've heard from colleagues have become a part of my own work experience. I've learned to accept the strange and unexplainable. The hospital is a place where life and death meet, and where everyone carries a piece of history and memory within them. One night, while working alone on the night shift, I realized I had become familiar with those strange sounds. I no longer felt the fear I once did. Instead, I felt a connection to the stories that this hospital holds. I decided I would share these stories with others, to help them understand that strange things aren't always scary as sometimes. They're just parts of life we don't yet fully understand. In the end, the hospital became an important part of my life. These experiences are not just memories, but valuable lessons in sensitivity and respect for the world around me. I've learned that sometimes we need to open ourselves to things that the eyes cannot see and the ears cannot hear. These stories will always be a part of me, unforgettable memories in my journey of caring for patients. I work at a hospital located in a relatively new building, perhaps around 30 years old. Although it's not too old, what makes this place special is that it was built on the site of an old psychiatric hospital, which had existed for decades before the current hospital was constructed. With such a history, many believe that what once happened there still lingers. Over the years, there have been a few successful suicides at the old hospital, and in the current building, there have also been several deaths due to illness. My colleagues swear that this hospital is haunted. At first, I didn't pay much attention to those stories because I don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural. However, an event that happened a few months ago made me start to reconsider. That night, I was working the night shift. Everything was going as usual until I received a call from a colleague working in the pediatric ward down in the basement. Her voice was full of panic, urging me to come down immediately to check on something. This was very unusual, as she was always calm and maintained professionalism in every situation. To make things even stranger, the security guard also showed up, the same one I mentioned in a previous story. He was not the type to get easily shaken, but tonight he seemed anxious, which made me feel like something truly unsettling was happening. When I arrived in the basement, I was led to a patient room that had been closed off for repairs. The door was tightly locked, and had remained locked all night. The staff working in that hallway had been going in and out of the area regularly, but no one had unlocked this particular room. What struck me as odd was why everyone seemed so concerned about a locked room. I thought to myself that it might just be an issue with the door or some kind of technical glitch, but things weren't as simple as I had assumed. As I approached the patient room, my colleague and the security guard showed me a single frame from the security footage. Due to security protocols, they couldn't show me the entire video, but just glancing at that frame was enough to make me feel uneasy. In the footage, the door, which had been locked all night, was clearly open. What made it even more disturbing was the image of a young black boy with short hair, visible from the shoulders up, lying on the floor at the entrance. The image wasn't just a quick flicker, lingered there for a few minutes, according to the security guard. The strange part was that no one had access to that room all night, and the staff confirmed that no one had entered or exited the room. So how could the door have opened, and how did the image of that boy appear there? Even though I don't believe in ghosts, I couldn't deny that the image was eerie and difficult to explain. The moment I saw that frame, I began to reflect on everything I had heard about this hospital. Stories of ghosts haunting the building, mysterious deaths from the old psychiatric facility, and even suicides that had taken place here. The rumors and tales that I had once dismissed as trivial now seemed to carry more weight, making me reconsider their significance. Later, I did some digging and uncovered an important detail. One of the last patients to stay in that room before it was closed for repairs was a young man. He had gone through a lot in his life, and tragically, not long after being discharged, he committed suicide. Learning this gave me chills. I couldn't help but wonder if there was a connection between the strange occurrence with the boy I saw in the footage and the tragic death of that former patient. I tried to find a rational explanation for what had happened. Maybe it was just a prank, or perhaps the footage had been tampered with. I kept telling myself that it was just a technical glitch, but deep down, I couldn't entirely dismiss the possibility that something else was going on. My colleague, the one who had caught me down to the basement, was visibly upset and angry about the whole thing. She was convinced this wasn't a joke and was certain that something unusual had occurred. After that incident with the locked door and the image of the boy in the footage, I started paying more attention to the strange things happening around the hospital. The stories about ghosts, odd noises at night, and the eerie feelings my colleagues had shared no longer felt like trivial tales. I had heard many people talk about seeing shadowy figures moving through the halls at night, or feeling as if someone was watching them during late shifts. In the past, I would laugh and assume it was just due to fatigue or their imagination, but now, I began to wonder if those things could actually be real. I don't know if this story will ever have a clear explanation. Maybe it was just a strange technical glitch, or perhaps an elaborate prank. But whatever the truth may be, I can't deny that this hospital with its complex history and memories of the past, carries an atmosphere that's difficult to explain. Every time I walk through the basement at night, I can't help but remember the image from the footage and the chill I felt when I saw the door open without anyone there. While I don't believe in ghosts, I can't deny that there are things beyond human understanding. And sometimes, there are stories we simply can't explain with words.